The wrench slipped from his hand and crashed against the marble floor just as a terrified little girl
look
screamed,
up there!
Watch
"Mom,
out! Get away!"
look out!" Alexander Hayes didn't think. He lunged forward. A massive crystal chandelier, loosened by a hidden structural fault, came crashing from the ceiling of the luxury lobby. Glass exploded across the polished floor. People scattered in every direction. Someone shouted, "Run!" Alexander wrapped both arms around the little girl and rolled across the floor seconds before hundreds of pounds of crystal shattered where they had been standing. The lobby fell silent. The child's mother rushed over, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God! Lily, are you okay?" The little girl nodded before pointing at the man in the blue maintenance uniform. "He saved me." The woman threw her arms around Alexander. "I don't even know your name." He smiled warmly. "I'm just the maintenance guy." No one questioned it. No one noticed that the maintenance worker's watch cost more than some luxury cars. No one recognized the face that appeared on business magazine covers across America. That was exactly how Alexander wanted it. Because every Monday, America's youngest billionaire disappeared. No designer suites. No private jets. No bodyguards. Just blue coveralls, toolbox, and a promise he had made 12 years earlier. A promise to the woman who had changed his life forever. His mother. As emergency crews arrived, the building manager hurried toward him. "Alex, are you all right?" Alexander gave him a subtle look. The manager immediately corrected himself. "Sorry, Alan." Alexander nodded. "Everyone okay?" "I think so." "Good." The manager leaned closer. "Mr. Hayes, security has already." Alexander cut him off with a whisper. "Not here." The manager understood. Within seconds, he returned to acting as though Alexander were simply another employee. Most people never looked twice at maintenance workers. That was precisely why Alexander spent one day every week pretending to be one. People showed you who they really were when they thought you had nothing. As paramedics checked on everyone, Alexander quietly picked up his toolbox. His shift wasn't over. Not yet. Across the lobby, a young woman hurried inside carrying a stack of folders, balancing a laptop bag over one shoulder and speaking into her phone. "I'm almost there, Mrs. Dawson. I promise." She barely finished the sentence before one folder slipped from her hands. Papers scattered across the lobby like snow. "Oh no!" She knelt to gather them. Alexander walked over without hesitation. "I've got these." She looked up. For a moment time seemed to pause. Warm hazel eyes, dark chestnut hair pulled into a simple ponytail. No expensive jewelry. No designer handbag. Just kindness written across her face. "Thank you," she said softly. He handed her the final document. "I think that's everything." She smiled. "I don't know how I'd survive today without you." Alexander chuckled. "Looks like you've had quite a morning. You have no idea." She extended her hand.
I'm Emily Carter.
He hesitated for the briefest second. "Alan." She shook his hand. "It's nice to meet you, Alan." Something about the way she smiled felt genuine. Not impressed. Not calculating. Just kind. Before she could leave, she noticed the broken chandelier. "Were you here when that happened?" "I was. I heard someone saved a little girl." Alexander shrugged. "Just did what anyone would have done." Emily looked at him carefully. "I don't think everyone would have." Before he could respond, someone called her name. "Emily." She turned. "I'm coming." Looking back at Alexander, she smiled again. "Thank you for helping me." Then she hurried toward the elevators. Alexander watched the doors close. For reasons he couldn't explain, he hoped he'd see her again. On the 42nd floor, Alexander stepped into a private executive office after removing the maintenance cap from his head. Within seconds, 3 executives stood. "So, how bad is it?" one asked. Alexander placed the cap on the conference table. "The chandelier inspection reports." Silence. "I want every maintenance record. They're already being gathered."
No.
His voice hardened. "I want the originals." The executives exchanged nervous glances. One finally asked, "You think someone altered them?" Alexander looked through the glass wall toward the city skyline. I don't build companies that ignore safety. If that chandelier fell today, he paused. It almost killed a child. Someone failed. And I'm going to find out who. This was the Alexander Hayes the world rarely saw. Calm, focused, uncompromising. He had built Hayes Global Holdings from a struggling logistics startup into one of America's largest real estate and infrastructure companies before turning 35. Yet, despite his wealth, every Monday reminded him where he'd come from. His mother had cleaned office buildings for nearly 20 years. She used to tell him, Alexander, never let money make you forget the people who keep the lights on. After she died, he promised himself something. Once every week, he would become invisible. He would work alongside janitors, maintenance crews, security guards, receptionists, people everyone else overlooked. Because the truth about any company wasn't found inside boardrooms. It lived in the hallways. An assistant interrupted the meeting. Mr. Hayes, your afternoon schedule is ready. He sighed. Cancel everything after 3. The charity gala? Cancel it. The television interview? Cancel. The investors? They can wait. What are your plans? Alexander smiled slightly. I met someone interesting. Across town, Emily unlocked the doors of the Maple Grove Community Center. Children rushed inside laughing. An elderly volunteer greeted her. Morning, Emily. Morning, Mrs. Dawson. You made it. Barely. Mrs. Dawson laughed. You always make it. Emily looked around the aging building. Peeling paint, old chairs, leaking pipes, a basketball hoop held together with tape. Yet somehow, this place felt richer than most mansions. One little boy ran toward her. Miss Emily. She knelt. Hey, Noah. Guess what? What? I got an A in math. She hugged him tightly. I knew you could. Mrs. Dawson smiled. Those children adore you. Emily looked around. They deserve someone who believes in them. Her smile faded slightly. I just hope we can keep the doors open. Mrs. Dawson sighed. The city still hasn't approved the grant? Emily shook her head. If we don't receive funding soon. Neither woman finished the sentence. The silence said enough. That evening, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about the woman from the lobby. Not because she was beautiful, though she certainly was. It was something else. She had thanked the maintenance worker before asking what he did. She hadn't judged him. She hadn't looked past him. She had simply seen a person. That was rare. Very rare. His phone buzzed. It was his longtime friend and legal advisor, Michael. You disappeared again today. I worked. Michael laughed. You mean you played maintenance man again? Alexander smiled. I learned something. Oh. There are still good people. Michael chuckled. You sound hopeful. Alexander looked out across the lights of Manhattan. Maybe I am. 3 days later, fate intervened again. Alexander arrived at Maple Grove Community Center carrying a toolbox. Emily blinked in surprise. Alan? He smiled. I heard this place needed someone who knows how to fix things. She folded her arms playfully. You followed me? I followed a leaking pipe. She laughed. That's either the worst excuse I've ever heard, or the sweetest. He grinned. So, do I get the job? Emily handed him a wrench. Only if you're as good as you claim. Alexander looked around the aging building. I'll do my best. Neither of them noticed the black luxury SUV parked across the street. Inside sat Richard Stone, Chief Operating Officer of Hayes Global Holdings. He stared through tinted windows, confused, suspicious. Then he frowned. What on earth is Alexander doing here? Richard picked up his phone. Find out everything about that woman. As the SUV slowly pulled away, neither Alexander nor Emily realized that a quiet act of kindness had just drawn the attention of the one man willing to destroy lives to protect his own secrets. If you're already wondering why one of America's richest men would risk everything to hide his identity, you're asking exactly the right question. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next, because this story is only beginning. The old pipe burst without warning. A stream of water shot straight into Alexander's face. Emily jumped back before bursting into laughter. "Oh no, Alan!" Alexander wiped the water from his eyes and looked at the soaked wrench in his hand. "I think the pipe just declared war." She laughed even harder. "You actually look better covered in water. That's the nicest insult I've ever received." "I'm serious." "Oh, now I'm worried." She handed him a towel. "Here. Thanks." For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was one of those quiet moments that didn't feel awkward. It felt comfortable. Emily finally broke the silence. "You know something?" "What?" "I've never met anyone who enjoys fixing broken things as much as you." Alexander smiled. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be broken." She looked at him, surprised. "What happened?" He hesitated. "My mother." Emily's smile faded.
I'm sorry.
"I lost her a long time ago." "What was she like?" Alexander looked around the community center. "She worked harder than anyone I've ever known." "What did she do?" "She cleaned office buildings." Emily nodded slowly. "My mom worked 2 jobs." Alexander looked at her. "Really?" "She always said honest work should never be looked down on." He couldn't help smiling. "My mother used to say exactly the same thing." Emily laughed softly. Maybe they would have been friends. Maybe. Neither of them realized how true that statement really was. Across the street, Richard Stone watched through binoculars from inside another parked SUV. His assistant lowered a tablet. "We've identified the woman." Richard never looked away. "Tell me." "Emily Carter, age 29. Director of Maple Grove Community Center. No criminal history. No debt. Guardian of her 16-year-old brother after both parents died." Richard's expression remained cold. "Anything else?" "She's been fighting the redevelopment project." Richard slowly lowered the binoculars. "The redevelopment project? The one our shell company purchased?" "Yes." A smile spread across his face. "What an interesting coincidence." The assistant frowned. "What do you mean?" Richard leaned back. "The woman Alexander suddenly can't stop visiting. Just happens to be standing in the way of our biggest project." His smile disappeared. "I don't believe in coincidences." Inside the community center, laughter echoed from the gymnasium. Children were playing basketball with an old hoop that leaned dangerously to one side. Alexander walked over. "How long has this been like this?" Emily sighed. "Too long. We keep repairing it because we can't afford a new one." Alexander grabbed the support pole and gently shook it. It moved far more than it should. His expression changed instantly. "Everyone." The children stopped playing. "I need you all to step away from the court." One little boy looked disappointed. "But we're winning." Alexander smiled. "You'll win again tomorrow." "Promise." "I promise." The children reluctantly moved aside. Alexander examined the bolts. Several had rusted almost completely through. He looked at Emily. "This could have fallen." She swallowed hard. "That serious?" He nodded. "Very." Without another word, he opened his toolbox. For the next 2 hours he worked without stopping. Replacing bolts, reinforcing supports, realigning the backboard. The children watched him like he was performing magic. One little girl whispered, "He's like a superhero." Alexander overheard her and laughed.
No.
"I'm just someone who doesn't like seeing people get hurt." Emily stood quietly watching him. Something about this man confused her. He worked with incredible skill. He never complained. He treated every child like family. Yet he never talked about himself. It was as if he carried an entire lifetime behind his smile. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Dawson handed Alexander a paper cup of lemonade. "You've done more today than 3 contractors managed all year." Alexander laughed. "I had good helpers." The children proudly nodded. Emily sat beside him on the front steps. "You know." "What?" "I still don't know much about you." "What would you like to know?" She thought for a moment. "What do you dream about?" Alexander wasn't expecting that question. "Dream? Yeah. If money wasn't an issue, what would make you happy?" He looked toward the children playing tag. My mother used to tell me success isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by how many lives are better because you existed. Emily smiled. I like that. So that's your dream? To leave things better than I found them. She stared at him. You're different. In a good way? In a confusing way. He laughed. I'll take that. She nudged his shoulder. Your turn. What do you dream about? Emily looked at the weathered building. I want every child who walks through these doors to believe their future isn't decided by where they were born. Alexander felt something tighten inside his chest. She wasn't chasing wealth. She wasn't chasing fame. She wanted hope. And somehow, that made her more extraordinary than anyone he'd met in years. As the sun began to set, Emily locked the front entrance. Thanks again. My pleasure. She hesitated. Would you maybe like to grab dinner sometime? Alexander blinked. Dinner? She laughed nervously. You know, as friends. He smiled. I'd like that. Great. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. As they walked away in opposite directions, neither noticed Richard's SUV disappearing into traffic. Inside, Richard's patience had run out. This is becoming a problem. His assistant looked over. What do you want us to do? Richard's voice turned icy. I want to know why Alexander is hiding in that neighborhood. And I want every piece of information we can find. If that woman is distracting him, we remove the distraction. The assistant hesitated. You mean? Richard cut him off. I don't care how. Back at Hayes Global headquarters the next morning, Alexander walked into the executive boardroom wearing a tailored navy suit. The same executives who barely noticed the maintenance worker immediately stood. Good morning, Mr. Hayes. He nodded. Let's begin. The finance director started presenting quarterly profits. Revenue is up 14%. Alexander barely looked at the slides. What properties have we acquired this quarter? The room became quiet. The acquisitions director answered carefully. 37. I'd like to review each one. Today. Yes. The director swallowed. Some of those purchases were approved through the COO's office. Alexander looked toward Richard. Then I'm sure Richard won't mind explaining them. Richard smiled confidently. Of course not. He slid a folder across the table. Alexander opened it. The first few projects seemed routine. Then he reached another file. Maple Grove Redevelopment Project. His eyes narrowed. He kept reading. Luxury apartments. Commercial retail space. Estimated demolition date. 3 weeks. Alexander looked up slowly. What's being demolished? Richard answered casually. An abandoned community property. Alexander's voice became calm. Abandoned. Richard nodded. It hasn't been profitable for years. Alexander closed the folder. Who inspected the site? Our consultants. Did you personally visit it? Richard smiled. There wasn't any need. Alexander stared at him for several seconds. Then he quietly said, I visited yesterday. The room fell silent. Richard's smile disappeared. Alexander continued. I saw over 100 children. I met volunteers. I met teachers. I met families. So tell me again, how exactly is that building abandoned? No one dared speak. Richard forced a laugh. There must be some misunderstanding. Alexander leaned forward. I don't like misunderstandings. I like facts. So here's what we're going to do. He slid the file back across the table. Effective immediately. The Maple Grove demolition is suspended. Richard's jaw tightened. Alexander. He raised one hand. I wasn't asking. You'll provide every document connected to that acquisition by tomorrow morning. And if a single page is missing, he looked directly into Richard's eyes. We're going to have a very different conversation. Richard nodded, but inside, anger boiled. He had spent 3 years hiding millions of dollars through fraudulent redevelopment deals. If Alexander started digging, everything could collapse. Everything. As Alexander left the boardroom, his phone vibrated. A message from Emily appeared. Looking forward to dinner tonight. Don't be late, maintenance man. Smiling face with smiling eyes. For the first time that day, he smiled. He had no idea that before the night was over, someone would make sure that dinner never happened. Alexander looked at Emily's message one more time before slipping the phone into his pocket. For the first time in months, he was actually looking forward to the evening. Not a board meeting. Not an investor dinner. Not another charity gala where everyone wanted something from him. Just dinner with a woman who believed he repaired broken pipes for a living. He smiled to himself. I can't remember the last time I was this nervous. His assistant, Sophia, happened to overhear him. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. He looked up. What? Did you just say you were nervous? Alexander laughed. Apparently I did. She folded her arms. I've seen you negotiate $10 billion acquisitions without blinking. I've watched you speak before world leaders. But dinner with one woman? He sighed dramatically. Terrifying. Sophia couldn't help laughing. Who is she? Someone different. You like her. Alexander didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. Across town, Emily stood in front of her bedroom mirror, trying on a simple navy blue dress. Her younger brother, Ben, leaned against the doorframe with a grin. So, she smiled at his reflection. So what? You've changed outfits 3 times. I have not. You absolutely have. She laughed. I'm just making sure I don't look ridiculous. Ben folded his arms. You've never cared about clothes before. Emily threw a pillow at him. Oh, stop. He caught it easily. You like him. I barely know him. You smile every time your phone buzzes. I do not. You smiled 5 seconds ago. Emily looked down, trying to hide her grin. He's just nice.
Ben shrieked.
That's rare. She nodded. It really is. He became serious. Just promise me something. What? If he ever hurts you, I'll break his nose. Emily burst into laughter. You couldn't break anyone's nose. I could try. She hugged him. I'll be fine. She believed that. She truly did. 45 minutes before dinner, Alexander walked toward the underground parking garage carrying a small paper bag. Inside was a homemade apple pie from a tiny bakery his mother used to visit. Emily had once mentioned apple pie was her favorite dessert. He had remembered. As he reached his car, his head of security rushed toward him. Mr. Hayes. Alexander frowned. What is it? We have a situation. I have dinner. This can't wait. Security handed him a tablet. Alexander watched surveillance footage from the luxury lobby. His expression darkened. Richard Stone was speaking privately with the building's maintenance supervisor. The supervisor handed Richard several files. What are those? The original inspection reports from the chandelier accident. Alexander looked up sharply. I specifically ordered those reports sent directly to me. They never arrived.
No.
They were intercepted. Alexander immediately understood. Richard was cleaning up evidence. Destroying something. Where is he now? We lost him. Alexander's jaw tightened. Find him. Yes, sir. Alexander looked at his watch. Dinner was in 30 minutes. His instincts screamed at him. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Several miles away, Richard Stone sat inside his private office. Stacks of documents covered the desk. His lawyer looked nervous. Alexander suspended Maple Grove. I know. If he audits those acquisitions. Richard calmly fed another document into a paper shredder. He won't. You're certain? Richard smiled. People only find what still exists. The lawyer hesitated. What about the digital records? They're already gone. The accounting trail? Erased. The lawyer lowered his voice. And the witnesses? Richard looked out the window. They're loyal. Or afraid. Either works. His phone rang. It was the investigator he had hired. Talk. The voice answered immediately. We've been following Emily Carter. What did you learn? Nothing suspicious. Richard frowned. What about Alexander? They've had dinner plans tonight. Richard smiled slowly. Perfect. The investigator continued. Should we keep watching? Richard's expression turned cold.
No.
I think it's time they stopped seeing each other. Emily arrived at the small Italian restaurant 10 minutes early. She checked her phone. No message yet. She smiled anyway. He'll be here. The waitress approached. Meeting someone? Emily nodded. Yes. Lucky man. Emily laughed softly. We'll see. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. She glanced toward the entrance. Still nothing. She picked up her phone. No messages. That's strange. She wasn't upset. Just concerned. Alan didn't seem like someone who forgot his promises. Alexander was halfway to the restaurant when his phone rang. Sophia. He answered through the car speakers. Sophia. Mr. Hayes, you need to turn around. I can't. You have to. We found something. Alexander gripped the steering wheel. What? The original inspection reports. His heart skipped. And they weren't accidents. What do you mean? Sophia's voice trembled. Someone intentionally approved defective safety inspections. Alexander's expression hardened. How many? She hesitated. 43 buildings. His grip tightened. What? We've confirmed signatures were forged. Millions were diverted from maintenance budgets. Alexander felt cold. 43 buildings. Thousands of tenants. Families. Children. Employees. Any one of them could have died. His voice became almost a whisper. Who signed them? Sophia answered quietly. Richard Stone. Alexander immediately turned the car around. I'm coming. As he accelerated away, he never noticed the black sedan pulling into the restaurant parking lot. Emily checked the time again. 30 minutes late. Now she was worried. She called. The phone rang. No answer. She tried again. Voicemail. Hey, Alan. She smiled awkwardly into the phone. I hope everything's okay. Just call me when you can. She hung up. The waitress approached gently. Would you like to order while you wait? Emily shook her head. I'll give him a little more time. Outside, the black sedan remained parked. The driver watched her through the windshield. Then he picked up his phone. She's alone. Richard's voice came through immediately. Good. Proceed. The driver stepped out. He wore a dark jacket and carried a large envelope. He walked calmly into the restaurant. Emily looked up as he approached her table. Ms. Emily Carter? Yes. I was asked to deliver this. From who? I'm afraid I don't know. He placed the envelope on the table. Have a nice evening. Before she could ask another question, he was gone. Emily frowned. She opened the envelope. Inside were photographs. Her smile vanished. The first photo showed Alan walking into Hayes Global headquarters. The second showed him stepping out of a limousine. The third made her hands tremble. Alan stood on a stage wearing an elegant tuxedo. Behind him was a giant screen displaying the words, Alexander Hayes, founder and CEO. Emily stared at the picture. No. She shook her head. This has to be fake. Her breathing became uneven. She flipped to another photograph. Alexander was shaking hands with senators. Another, meeting international business leaders. Another, on the cover of a business magazine. Then she reached the final page. A newspaper headline. America's billionaire philanthropist expands empire. Below it, the same smile, the same eyes. The same man who had introduced himself as Alan. Her fingers tightened around the photographs. He lied to me. Tears began forming in her eyes. Not because he was rich, because every conversation suddenly felt uncertain. Every memory, every smile, every shared moment. Who are you? She whispered. Just then, her phone rang. The screen lit up. Alan calling. Emily stared at it. Her thumb hovered over the answer button. She wanted an explanation. She wanted the truth. But she also wanted to know if anything he had ever said to her had been real. The phone continued ringing. Then, she pressed decline. Miles away, Alexander lowered his phone slowly, unaware that someone had reached Emily before he could. And in Richard Stone's office, A satisfied smile crossed his face as he watched a live feed from a hidden camera pointed toward Emily's table. Now, he murmured, let's see if trust is easier to destroy than it is to build. Alexander frowned as the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. No answer. A third time. Still nothing. He leaned back in the driver's seat and closed his eyes for a brief moment. Emily, he whispered. Please answer. Something inside him felt wrong. Not because she wasn't answering, because she always answered. His instincts had saved him countless times in business. Now they were telling him something else. Someone had gotten to her first. He immediately called Sophia. I need a favor. You don't have to ask. Find out if anyone contacted Emily Carter today. Sophia paused. You think Richard knows about her? I don't think. I know. I'm on it. Alexander ended the call and started the engine again. He wasn't going home. He was going to the restaurant. Whether Emily wanted to see him or not, she deserved the truth. Emily sat alone inside her car, gripping the photographs so tightly that the edges had begun to bend. She couldn't stop staring at Alexander's face on the magazine cover. The smile was the same. The eyes were the same. Everything was the same, except his name, his life, his entire identity. She laughed bitterly through tears. Alan.
No.
Alexander Hayes. So who were you every time we talked? Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Alexander. It was Mrs. Dawson. Emily quickly wiped her eyes before answering. Hi, Mrs. Dawson. My dear, where are you? I'm out. You don't sound all right. Emily forced a smile she knew the older woman couldn't see. I'm just tired. Mrs. Dawson hesitated. I wasn't going to tell you tonight, but I think you should know. Emily sat upright. Know what? Someone came to the community center this afternoon. Her heart skipped. Who? A group of men in expensive suits. They were taking photographs. Emily's stomach tightened. Did they say why? They said demolition would begin sooner than expected. Emily's eyes widened. What? They claimed all the paperwork had been approved. Emily's voice trembled. That's impossible. They acted as if the decision was final. Emily looked back at Alexander's photographs. Hayes Global Holdings, the company behind the project. The company owned by the man who had lied to her. Her heart broke all over again. I'll be there in 10 minutes. She hung up and drove away without noticing another vehicle quietly following her. Alexander reached the restaurant only to find Emily gone. The waitress recognized him immediately. You must be Alan. He nodded. I was supposed to meet someone. She sighed sympathetically. She waited almost an hour. His shoulders dropped. Did she leave anything? The waitress hesitated. Only this. She handed him the paper napkin Emily had been absent-mindedly folding while she waited. Written neatly across it were just 6 words. Who are you really, Alan? Alexander closed his eyes. Richard. It had to be Richard. No one else knew enough to expose him. He looked up. Did anyone speak to her? The waitress thought for a moment. There was a man. He delivered an envelope. What envelope? I don't know. He left almost immediately. Alexander didn't need to hear another word. He pulled out his phone and dialed Richard. The call connected after the first ring. Richard sounded unusually cheerful. Alexander, you sent someone. I have no idea what you're talking about. You exposed me to Emily. Silence. Then Richard chuckled. If I did, would that really be such a terrible thing? Alexander's voice turned icy. You don't get to interfere in my life. Richard laughed. Your personal life became my business the moment it started affecting the company. You've crossed a line.
No.
Richard replied calmly. You crossed it when you suspended a billion-dollar redevelopment because of one woman. Alexander clenched his jaw. Stay away from her. Richard's answer came without hesitation. I can't promise that. The line went dead. Alexander stared at the phone for a long moment. Then he quietly said, Big mistake. Emily arrived at Maple Grove Community Center to find several volunteers gathered outside. Mrs. Dawson hurried toward her. "I'm so glad you're here. What happened?" One of the volunteers pointed across the street. Large orange survey stakes had been hammered into the ground around the property. Emily felt sick. Construction markings. Someone was preparing the land. "But the appeal hasn't even been heard." Mrs. Dawson nodded. "I know." Emily looked around. Children who normally laughed on the playground stood silently beside their parents. Noah tugged gently on her sleeve. "Miss Emily." She knelt beside him. "Yes. Are they taking our center away?" His tiny voice cracked on the last word. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. She couldn't answer, because she didn't know. Noah looked down. "My mom says we can't afford anywhere else." Emily wrapped her arms around him. "We're going to fight. I promise." She looked up at the building, then at the Hayes Global logo printed on one of the survey vehicles. Tears filled her eyes. "How could you do this?" she whispered. At that same moment, Alexander stormed into Hayes Global headquarters. Employees stepped aside immediately. No one had ever seen him walking this fast. Sophia intercepted him near the executive elevators. "I traced the envelope. What did you find?" "It was delivered by a private investigator hired through one of Richard's shell companies." Alexander nodded slowly. "So it's confirmed." She handed him another folder. "There's more." He opened it. Inside were financial records, offshore accounts, hidden payments, fake contractors. His eyes narrowed. "How much?" Sophia answered quietly. "Over $400 million. Alexander looked up in disbelief. "Stolen?" "We believe so. And every fraudulent transaction leads back to Richard Stone." Alexander closed the folder. "Call the board. Tonight. Now. And contact the FBI." Sophia blinked. "The FBI? This isn't corporate misconduct anymore. It's organized fraud." She nodded immediately. "I'll make the calls." As she hurried away, Alexander stood alone for a moment. He wasn't thinking about the money. He wasn't even thinking about Richard. He was thinking about Emily, the hurt in her eyes when she discovered the truth. He understood it. If their positions had been reversed, he would have questioned everything too. Every laugh, every conversation, every promise. He whispered to himself, "I should have told you." Meanwhile, Richard sat comfortably inside his office, pouring himself a glass of expensive whiskey. His lawyer looked nervous. "The board has been called." "I know. The FBI may already be involved." Richard smiled. "They're too late." "What do you mean?" Richard opened a small safe hidden behind a painting. Inside was a passport, several bundles of cash, and an airline ticket. Midnight, private flight, destination, Switzerland. His lawyer stared. "You're leaving?" Richard nodded. "I've always believed in having an exit strategy." "What about the company?" Richard laughed. "The company? My dear friend, I've already taken everything worth stealing." Just then his phone vibrated. A security alert flashed across the screen. "Board of Directors emergency session. Attendance required immediately." Richard smiled. "Looks like the show is about to begin." He slipped the passport into his jacket. What he didn't know was that someone inside his own office had been secretly recording every conversation for months. And those recordings were already on their way to Alexander Hayes. The truth was finally catching up. But before Alexander could expose Richard, he still had one person he desperately needed to face. Emily. Because saving his company would mean nothing if he had already lost the woman he loved forever. Alexander didn't wait for the recordings. He didn't wait for the board meeting. And he didn't wait for the FBI. He got into his car and drove straight toward Maple Grove Community Center. For the first time in years, America's youngest billionaire wasn't trying to save a company. He was trying to save one relationship. Emily stood alone inside the empty gymnasium. The children had gone home. The silence felt heavier than ever. She slowly ran her fingers across the old basketball hoop Alexander had repaired only days earlier. She could still hear his voice. You can't build anything strong on weak foundations. She closed her eyes. Was that a lie too? A tear rolled down her cheek. I don't even know your name. The gym door creaked open. She didn't have to turn around. She knew who it was. You shouldn't be here. Alexander stopped a few feet behind her. I know. She kept her back to him. Why did you come? Because you deserve the truth. She laughed bitterly. The truth? Which one? The one where you're a maintenance worker? Or the one where you're one of the richest men in America? Alexander lowered his head. I deserve that. She finally turned. Her eyes were red from crying. I trusted you. I know. I defended you. I know. I told my brother that people like you still existed. You do. No. Her voice echoed through the gym. I don't even know who you are. Alexander didn't interrupt. She needed to say everything. You looked me in the eyes. You listened to my dreams. You sat in this building. You laughed with those children. And every single time, you let me believe you were someone else. He took a slow breath. I never lied about the things that mattered. She stared at him in disbelief. You called yourself Alan. It was my middle name. You hid your last name. Yes. You hid your company. Yes. You hid your entire life. Yes. So don't tell me you didn't lie. Alexander closed his eyes. I won't. Silence settled between them. Finally he spoke. My mother cleaned office buildings. Emily didn't answer. Every night. She'd come home exhausted. But she'd still smile. She used to tell me. He swallowed. Alexander, if you ever become successful, don't let people treat you differently because of your money. Emily listened without speaking. After she died, I made her a promise. Every Monday, I become invisible. I work beside janitors, security guards, maintenance crews. I want to know how people are really treated. I want to know if my company is living by the values she taught me. He looked directly into her eyes. When I met you, I never expected, he smiled sadly, to fall in love. Emily looked away. You should have told me. I know. I tried. When? The night before our dinner. I was going to tell you everything. She shook her head. But you didn't.
No.
Why? Alexander answered honestly. Because I was afraid. She frowned. Afraid of what? That once you knew who I was, you'd stop looking at me the way you did. Emily whispered, do you know what hurts the most? What? I would have accepted the truth. I just needed the chance to hear it from you. Alexander's shoulders dropped. I know. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Before either of them could say another word, the front doors slammed open. Mrs. Dawson rushed inside, struggling to catch her breath. Emily. Emily hurried over. What happened? Mrs. Dawson pointed outside. They're here. Emily looked through the front windows. Her heart stopped. Bulldozers, construction trucks, private security vehicles, floodlights, more than 20 workers. And at the front, a large sign. Demolition begins tomorrow, authorized by Hayes Global Holdings. Emily slowly turned toward Alexander. He stared at the sign in disbelief. No. I suspended this project. A man wearing a construction helmet approached carrying a clipboard. Everyone needs to vacate the property. Emily stepped forward. You can't do this. We have a court hearing next week. The supervisor shrugged. I'm following orders. Alexander took the clipboard. Who signed these? The man looked annoyed. And you are. Alexander reached into his wallet. For the first time since Emily had met him, he showed his executive identification. The supervisor's face lost all color. Mr. Hayes. Alexander's voice became ice cold. I asked you a question. The supervisor stammered. The authorization came directly from Mr. Richard Stone's office. I was told the suspension had been lifted. It wasn't. Alexander handed the clipboard back. Every vehicle leaves. Immediately, the supervisor hesitated. But sir, Alexander took one step closer. Did I stutter? Within seconds the workers began climbing back into their trucks. Engines started. Bulldozers reversed. The entire convoy slowly pulled away. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence. Emily looked at Alexander. You really didn't know? He shook his head.
No.
She believed him. For the first time since the photographs, she saw genuine anger. Not because his authority had been challenged. Because innocent families had almost been hurt. Just then, Sophia's car screeched into the parking lot. She jumped out holding a laptop. Mr. Hayes. Alexander met her halfway. What is it? We have the recordings. She opened the laptop. A video began playing. Richard Stone appeared on screen inside his office. His voice was perfectly clear. If Alexander keeps digging, destroy every document. Another clip. If Emily Carter is distracting him, remove the distraction. Emily gasped. Mrs. Dawson covered her mouth. Another recording played. The demolition proceeds whether Alexander approves it or not. Then another. By tomorrow night I'll be in Switzerland. Alexander's face hardened. Sophia looked up. The FBI has copies. They're on their way. Alexander nodded once. Good. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. This is Alexander Hayes. A calm voice replied. Mr. Hayes. This is Special Agent Daniel Brooks with the FBI. We're moving to arrest Richard Stone. Alexander exhaled. Finally, the agent continued. There's one problem. Alexander's expression changed. What problem? Mr. Stone has disappeared. Sophia immediately began typing. He left headquarters 23 minutes ago. The agent spoke again. We believe he's heading for a private airfield. Alexander looked toward his car. How much time? Less than 30 minutes before takeoff. Emily stepped closer. Alexander. He looked at her. If he escapes, he'll disappear forever. Emily nodded. Then go. He hesitated. What about you? She managed a faint smile. I'll still be here. He searched her face. Will you? Emily looked into his eyes for a long moment. Then she quietly said, I still don't know if I can forgive you. But I do know. Richard can't be allowed to hurt anyone else. Alexander gave a small nod. Thank you. As he climbed into his car, Emily called out, Alexander. He stopped. She smiled sadly. Come back alive. For the first time all day, he smiled. I intend to. His car roared out of the parking lot. Moments later, FBI vehicles raced past with lights flashing. The chase had begun. Richard Stone had a 20-minute head start. Private jet waiting. Hundreds of millions of stolen dollars. And nothing left to lose. But Alexander wasn't chasing him for revenge. He was chasing him for every family placed in danger. For every child who almost lost their community center. And for the woman whose trust he was determined to earn back. Not with promises, but with the truth. The private jet's engines were already roaring when Alexander's car shot through the airport security gate. FBI vehicles followed close behind, sirens piercing the night. Airport personnel scattered. A ground marshal waved frantically. You can't drive out there. Alexander didn't slow down. Ahead, the sleek white jet began rolling toward the runway. Inside the cockpit, Richard Stone looked over his shoulder and smiled. We made it. His pilot sounded uneasy. Sir.
FBI vehicles.
Richard glanced through the window. They're too late. He checked his watch. Take off. The pilot pushed the throttles forward. The jet accelerated. At that exact moment, FBI SUVs surrounded the taxiway from both sides. Special Agent Daniel Brooks stepped out wearing a tactical vest. He raised a loudspeaker. Richard Stone. Shut down the aircraft immediately. Richard laughed. I don't think so. The jet continued gaining speed. Alexander watched the distance closing rapidly. He's going to make it. Daniel turned toward his team. Disable the runway. Within seconds, airport emergency trucks raced onto the tarmac, blocking the runway with massive fire engines. The pilot's eyes widened. We can't take off. Richard slammed his fist against the armrest. Go around them. We don't have enough runway. The pilot pulled the brakes. The aircraft screeched violently. Smoke poured from the tires. Finally, it stopped barely 50 yards from the fire engines. Silence. Richard closed his eyes. Then he slowly reached into his jacket. The FBI agents immediately raised their weapons. Don't move. Richard ignored them. Alexander stepped forward. Richard. Richard looked up. You won. Alexander shook his head.
No.
You lost. Richard laughed bitterly. You think this changes anything? You'll save your company. You'll save your reputation. But you'll never get the girl back. Alexander didn't answer. Richard continued. You should have stayed focused on business. You became weak. Alexander calmly replied.
No.
I became human. Richard smiled sadly. You know what your problem has always been? You actually care. He reached into his jacket again. Several agents shouted. Hands where we can see them. Richard slowly removed a photograph. It showed Alexander and his mother standing outside a tiny apartment building decades earlier. Alexander frowned. Where did you get that? Richard looked at it for a long moment. Your office. I found it years ago. You know. I used to envy you. Alexander said nothing. You built everything from nothing. People respected you. They admired you. I spent years standing beside you, and no matter how much money I made, I was always just the second man. He looked up. So I decided, if I couldn't become you, I'd steal from you. The words hung in the air. Not a single person spoke. Richard sighed. I told myself I deserved it, that no one would notice. But stealing money, he laughed quietly, is easier than stealing someone's character. He gently placed the photograph on the aircraft seat, then slowly raised both hands. I'm done. FBI agents moved in immediately. Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. As they escorted him away, Richard stopped beside Alexander. You know. Alexander looked at him. She never fell in love with your money. I know. She fell in love with the maintenance worker. Alexander smiled faintly. The funny thing is, they were always the same man. Richard nodded. Then he disappeared into an FBI vehicle. His empire of lies had finally collapsed. 3 months later, the Maple Grove Community Center looked completely different. Fresh paint covered every wall. New classrooms buzzed with activity. The playground echoed with children's laughter. A modern library stood where an abandoned storage room had once been. Not because Alexander wanted publicity. In fact, there wasn't a single Hayes Global logo anywhere in the building. Instead, a simple plaque hung near the entrance, dedicated to the families who refused to give up on their community. Emily smiled every time she walked past it. Mrs. Dawson joined her. He kept his promise. Emily nodded. He did. He never even attended the opening ceremony. Emily smiled. He said this wasn't about him. Mrs. Dawson looked at her carefully. And what about you? Emily looked away. I don't know. He hasn't called. Mrs. Dawson raised an eyebrow. Neither have you. Emily laughed softly. No. You've both been equally stubborn. Before Emily could answer, Noah came running across the playground. Miss Emily, what is it? Someone's fixing the swing. Emily turned. A familiar blue maintenance uniform.
A familiar Tulbex. A familiar smile.
Alexander. He tightened one final bolt before testing the swing carefully. Only then did he notice Emily watching him. He smiled nervously. Emily slowly walked over. I thought billionaires hired people to do this. They do. So why are you doing it yourself? Alexander shrugged. It needed fixing. She couldn't help smiling. Some things never change.
No.
They don't. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. Emily looked at the children laughing nearby. I needed time. I know. I was angry. I know. I was hurt. I know. She looked directly into his eyes. But I also realized something. What? The man who repaired broken pipes. The man who stayed late to fix the basketball hoop. The man who listened to children talk about their dreams. He wasn't pretending. Alexander's voice softened.
No.
He never was. Emily nodded. You lied about your name. Yes. You lied about your job. Yes. But you never lied about your heart. Alexander felt emotion catch in his throat. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for the mistakes I made. Emily smiled. You don't have to spend the rest of your life. He looked confused. What do you mean? She reached into her bag and pulled out the folded paper napkin from the restaurant. The one that read, Who are you really, Alan? She crossed out the words with a pen. Then underneath she wrote, Now I know. She handed it to him. Alexander looked up. Does this mean? Emily laughed. It means. You still owe me dinner. He blinked. Dinner? You missed our first date. A grin spread across his face. So, I get a second chance? Emily stepped closer. But this time, she gently took his hand. No more secrets. He squeezed her hand. Never again. Ben walked past just then, pretending not to notice them. He looked at Alexander and smirked. So, I guess I don't have to break your nose after all. Everyone burst into laughter. Even Alexander. I appreciate that. That evening, they returned to the same little Italian restaurant. The same waitress recognized them immediately. She smiled. He finally showed up. Alexander laughed. I was delayed. Emily teased. By about 3 months. The waitress seated them at the same table. As she walked away, Alexander looked at Emily. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals. I've spoken before thousands of people. But somehow, I'm still nervous. Emily reached across the table and held his hand. Good. Why? Because it means this matters. Alexander smiled. It does. It always will. Outside, the lights of Manhattan shimmered against the night sky. Inside the restaurant, there were no billionaires.
No titles.
No companies. Just a man who had learned that honesty is worth more than wealth. And a woman who had discovered that genuine character can survive even the hardest test. Sometimes the greatest secret isn't that someone is rich. Sometimes the greatest secret is that beneath every title, every success, and every achievement, there is simply a human heart longing to be loved for who it truly is. And when love is built on truth instead of appearances, it becomes the kind of wealth that no amount of money can ever buy. Outside, the lights of Manhattan shimmered against the night sky. Inside the little Italian restaurant, there were no billionaires.
No titles.
No companies. Just a man who had learned that honesty is worth more than wealth. And a woman who had discovered that genuine character can survive even the hardest test. Sometimes the greatest secret isn't that someone is rich. Sometimes the greatest secret is that beneath every title, every success, and every achievement, there is simply a human heart longing to be loved for who it truly is. And when love is built on truth instead of appearances, it becomes the kind of wealth that no amount of money can ever buy. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable billionaire romance. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. If you were Emily, would you have forgiven Alexander after discovering his secret identity? Or would the broken trust have been too much to overcome? Thank you for spending this journey with us. Until our next story, remember, true love isn't measured by wealth or status. It is measured by honesty, kindness, and the courage to be your authentic self.